The Honourable Craig Foss.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The previous member said she was going to do some intro and then she was going to get into the substance. Well, I'm standing here still waiting for her to come to the substance of that particular commentary on the budget. But I guess we'll still be waiting, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, before I begin, can I just note this morning I went to the service, the Memorial Day service, for noting those that have fallen in service for the United States. It's a public holiday there today. But like our recent Anzac Gallipoli reflections here in New Zealand, actually it was a very good reminder of the friendship we have and those that we stand side by side with around the world to protect the values that we all cherish, and the price that has been paid over many, many years for the freedoms, the values that we have in New Zealand, and to allow us to have free and open debate in forums such as this, Mr Speaker. I think it's very important never to forget, lest we forget, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, budget number 7, Bill English's budget number 7. He continues, I didn't think he'd get better than the last one, but I said that last time as well. Actually, it is. Budget number 7 continues the core part of managing our finances prudently. Fiscally responsible budgets, making the hard calls for medium, long-term sustainability, if you want, or vibrancy for our economy, rather than the short-term inclinations which some members in the House keep wanting us to go back to, Mr Speaker. Actually, I do know what I meant to say when Mr Norman was speaking earlier. I mean, if it's really as bad as he seemed to make out, and if life is so terrible and everything is as tragic as he seemed to be implying that it was, well, actually step out into the real world, because actually any indicator, be it well-being, happiness index, confidence, economic type metrics, they're actually very, very good, solid, trending in the right way, Mr Speaker. So, a little bit of a word to the opposition, if you like, word of advice, don't have to take it, but stay negative and you'll stay negative polling, if you like. Be positive, be aspirational as we are with New Zealanders, for New Zealanders. Actually, perhaps their prospects would improve somewhat. Mr Speaker, this budget's all about, there's been a change, there's been a shift in our economy. Yes, it's been gradual, incremental, but a fundamental shift in the public's expectation of how we run the government crown finances and the environment that we're dealing with today. For example, and there's been quite a bit of discussion about the fact that actually we have almost zero inflation, 0% inflation, point something. It's as good as 0% inflation. Phenomenally good for our consumers, good for our economy, inflation not being corrosive on wealth. But, Mr Speaker, we also have about 2.83% growth forecast. In fact, I think we had 3.8% last year. So I just say that, Mr Speaker, so right now we have near 0% inflation. Last year we had about 3.8% growth. I think we've got about 2.8% forecast through this budget. And mortgage rates are around, floating mortgage rates, 5.5%, 6%-ish. Because that's actually the real world passing judgment, if you like, on how we're managing their finances, their balance sheet, how we're managing the economy. Because our only test of, say, another regime running our economy, so the last Labor budget or the financials or the economic metrics when they were last in government in 2008, it's an interesting contrast, because some of us still can't work out how they managed to achieve it. So it's worth reminding us what happens with ill-disciplined, endless spending, endless revenue gathering, productivity disappearing through the economy, and inflation absolutely by theft almost taking wealth from New Zealanders. So, for example, in 2008, the CPI, for example, was nudging 5%, Mr Speaker. 5% was the CPI. It seems unheard of now, because now it's around 0. 5%, and that was pumped up by the revenue gathering and borrowing and spending of the previous administration. That's not a number I've made up, that's the number that was. I think most people in the House agree inflation, ongoing inflation, is not good for our economy or our families, but anyway, that's what it was, 5%, it's now about 0. And then another metric, actually, when we came into government, New Zealand had been in recession for about 1 year. 1 year earlier than the global financial crisis, and of course that hit around that same time. But right now we've had over 3% growth. So we have 0% inflation, about 3+% growth, versus 5% inflation and a recession under Labor. It's interesting how those can be true. And how does that play out for our families, Mr. Speaker? Well, the simple measure or comparison is their mortgage. Because most families, actually the largest expense in their household budgets is in fact funding their mortgages. Well, a mortgage is now around 5.5%, 6%. Yet at a time when inflation was around 5%, the country was in recession, Labor had mortgages were around double figures, 10%. Imagine if those listeners on the radio, watching, or the members in the House, imagine if your own mortgage was now 10%. You'd probably be paying almost double out in a mortgage as you do now, because it's now 5.5%, 6%. So that's very interesting, even though many opposite talk about the housing situation in Auckland, and that's been well canvassed, I guess. But if New Zealand families, actually the horror thought had, I guess, a Labor government running the show at the moment, and they continued where they left off, remember, inflation near 5%, mortgages at double digits, near 10%, and the country in recession. And in fact, the export sector had been in recession for about 4 or 5 years, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, there's much in this budget for small business. Excuse me. There's much in this budget for small business. And I could talk about the framework or the cost. So I could talk about the cost of working capital, for example, or cash flow management. Because you see, under a Labor government, when floor inflation is around 5%, when mortgage interest rates are around 10%, the cost of working capital for our businesses is so much higher. Yet, when we have near 0% inflation and around 5%, 6% mortgages, actually the cost of running a business, of being an entrepreneur, of taking a risk under the national government is diametrically, totally, absolutely opposite and more beneficial to those business owners, to New Zealand, than it would be under the Labor government. And there's nothing subjective around those numbers. So, for example, Mr. Speaker, low inflation, stable interest rates, all impact and help our families and our businesses, of course. Mr. Speaker, $500 million in ACC levy cuts benefits our small businesses. In fact, that's on top of the $1.5 billion in levy cuts already locked in over previous budgets. Mr. Speaker, the tax cuts we had a few years ago, lowering company tax, adjusting personal taxes, rebalancing, all benefit our small businesses and particularly our small business families, who are, of course, those that are funding those small businesses, Mr. Speaker. The tyranny of distance, Mr. Speaker, been smashed. Not only international distance, but domestically, the tyranny of domestic distance being smashed. For example, Kiwi Bank is now operating one of its back offices in Hastings and Hawke's Bay. Wouldn't have been possible. 150 to 200 new jobs in Hastings, Hawke's Bay would not have been possible unless there was a UFB fibre rollout across New Zealand. That's the magic of A, empowering the regions, or empowering companies to have another look at the regions, making an economic analysis and evaluation themselves, and actually creating jobs in the regions. We are going to see more and more like that. New Zealand business number continues to be rolled out, Mr. Speaker, and there is money in the budget to help facilitate that. The member may laugh. So be interested to know if it's Labor policy to stop the New Zealand business number. If the member laughs at the New Zealand business number, the member's laughing at 1.1 million businesses that already have it. The member's laughing at about 500,000 businesses that are looking to take it, Mr. Speaker. So be interested to hear from other speakers if in fact it's now Labor policy to cancel the New Zealand business number, which will be fully implemented for government agencies by 2070. No, I'm asking the question because the member laughs, he laughs loudly, at the New Zealand business number and disputes it. So I ask other members if they support, does the Labor Party opposition support and endorse the New Zealand business number and all the benefits it creates of productivity or other for New Zealand businesses, families and our economy? It would be interesting to get that clarification. I will welcome it if it does come. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.